The sun was beginning to set behind the mountains, casting long and unsettling shadows over Shenandoah National Park. I had always loved that place, but today, a strange feeling settled in my chest. The trees, which once seemed welcoming, now appeared to whisper dark secrets. What would you do if someone disappeared right under your nose? I wondered as I watched the trail that led to one of the park's most isolated spots. As a ranger, my job was to protect nature and ensure the safety of visitors. But behind the uniforms, maps, and guidelines, there was something more, a responsibility that weighed upon me. The disappearance of a young man named Ethan Matthews still echoed in my mind. Since the day he vanished, his presence seemed to haunt every corner of the park, every trail I walked. Ethan was not just another visitor. He was a boy full of dreams, an adventurer who had gotten lost in a sea of trees and mysteries. The synopsis of my story is simple. A national park ranger finds himself involved in a mysterious disappearance that challenges his understanding of nature and life itself. With each clue that emerged, a darker truth was revealed, challenging everything I knew about the boundaries between the natural world and the supernatural. That night, as I walked the trails, the darkness felt deeper. The air was heavy, laden with an expectation that left me restless. I knew every inch of the park, yet still, the feeling of being watched would not leave me in peace. Ethan's story haunted me. He had disappeared in a place I knew well, and the idea that I could have done something to save him consumed me. It was a quiet night, but the tranquility was deceptive. A cold wind swept through the forest, making the leaves whisper as if trying to tell me a secret. I decided to head back to the base, but something stopped me. Presence, perhaps. Something that pulled me toward the trail leading to Shadow Valley, a place many avoided. They said the echoes of lost voices still inhabited that space, and for many, it was forbidden territory. With my heart racing, I resolved to move forward. The path was narrow, and the bushes closed in around me, as if they wanted to swallow me whole. With each step, a feeling that something was about to happen took hold of me. Then I saw something on the ground, a piece of fabric, the same pattern Ethan wore on his jacket. Adrenaline surged through my body. I was close to discovering something, or perhaps losing myself completely. The silence of the forest was disturbing. I could hear my heart beating to the rhythm of uncertainty. What could have happened to him? The idea that he might have found something he shouldn't have, something that defied rational explanation, began to torment me. The park was vast and full of secrets, and I feared that Ethan had stumbled upon one of them. As I walked, I began to hear a distant sound. It was as if someone was calling my name, echoing among the trees. A chill ran down my spine. I knew I shouldn't follow that voice, but the curiosity and the need to solve the mystery of Ethan were stronger. The call intensified, leading me deeper into the forest. Finally, I arrived at a clearing. The moonlight illuminated a small lake, and the surface of the water reflected the stars as if they were watchful eyes. But that was not what made me stop. In the center of the clearing stood a figure, a woman who seemed as ethereal as the very air. She was facing away, looking at the water, and for a moment, I hesitated. "Ethan," I called, but my voice sounded weak, almost like a plea. The figure slowly turned, and what I saw left me paralyzed. It was a woman, but her eyes held the depth of the night. She didn't speak, but I could feel that she knew what had happened. The connection between us was instant and terrifying. "You're here for him," she said, her voice echoing like a lament. Enveloped in an inexplicable fear, I knew I had crossed a line that could not be undone. I was overwhelmed by a wave of emotions: despair, hope, and a visceral need to understand. What did that woman know? What had happened to Ethan? The forest, once a refuge, was now becoming a labyrinth of uncertainties. The search for answers was just beginning, and the line between reality and the supernatural was becoming increasingly thin. I knew that in unraveling the mystery of Ethan, something within me would also change, perhaps forever. The woman in front of me seemed to float in space, as if the ground beneath her feet was merely an illusion. Her deep, enigmatic gaze fixed on me, and for a moment, everything around me disappeared. The lake, the trees, the darkness, everything became secondary. "You are here for him," she repeated, and the pain in her voice resonated within me like an echo of my own despair. "Who are you? Where is Ethan?" The pressure in my chest intensified, and my words came out haltingly, as if each syllable was a struggle. The figure shook her head slowly, and her eyes seemed to shine with their own light. "He is lost between worlds," she said, and the way she pronounced worlds made my heart stop. The forest grew darker, and the wind carried a lament that seemed to come from afar, from places I could not see. "I am a ranger," I forced myself to say, logic trying to impose itself over the inexplicable. "I have to find him. He can't be lost." The woman raised her hand, gesturing with an elegance that defied gravity. "Not everything that is lost can be found. Some things remain in the shadows, waiting to be freed." Before I could process what that meant, a noise to my left made me turn. It was a group of people, their faces pale and worried. I recognized one of them. It was Sam, a fellow ranger who used to work with me. "Are you okay?" he asked, concern evident in his tone. "We were looking for you. What are you doing here?" I saw a woman," I replied, still dazed. Sam looked at the clearing, but the figure had already disappeared, like a breath of wind. "There's no one here, buddy. We need to head back. It's dangerous to be here at night." Sam's expression was urgent, but I couldn't just ignore what I had seen. Something in his voice made me hesitate. "Ethan," I murmured. "I found a piece of his jacket." "Let's focus on finding him," Sam said, his voice now firmer. Next to him were two other people, Jenna, another ranger, and a group of young people who were camping nearby. They approached, restless, looking around as if expecting the bushes themselves to turn into monsters. "What happened?" Jenna asked, her eyes wide with concern. "Ethan disappeared. I found a piece of his clothing here," I replied, showing the fabric. "We need to search for him, and fast." The group organized itself, and soon we were moving along the trail, but the atmosphere was changing. The forest I once knew well now felt like a hostile maze. Shadows danced in the light of the lanterns, and I could feel the presence of the woman watching me with each step. As we walked, the tension mounted. The silence grew oppressive, and the whispers of the trees seemed to intensify. It was then that we heard it, a scream, a sharp sound that cut through the night and made the blood freeze in my veins. The group stopped, all of us exchanging nervous glances. "What was that?" one of the young people asked, his face pale. "Let's go. That way," Sam shouted, and we moved forward, adrenaline propelling us. The sound guided us, but the closer we got, the more the forest seemed to close in around us. The trees seemed to bend, as if they wanted to stop us from advancing. Nature, which had once been my home, was now becoming a prison. Finally, we reached a small clearing where a circle of stones rose from the ground. In the center, a small campfire still smoldered, and around it were marks in the soil, as if something had been dragged. The scream echoed again, and fear took hold of me. "Ethan," I shouted, but my voice sounded weak, lost in the vastness of the night. "We have to get out of here," Jenna said, her eyes wide. But before we could move, a shadow lunged at us. The air turned cold, and a palpable presence surrounded us. I felt a pressure, as if the forest itself was alive and watching us. "You shouldn't have come here," the woman's voice echoed in my mind, and I realized she was not just a spectator. She was connected to everything, to the darkness that enveloped us. What had I awakened? What had Ethan found? The group scattered in panic, and I found myself alone, surrounded by murmurs and shadows. Reality began to warp, and I realized that rational explanations were failing. What was happening? The search for Ethan was becoming a battle between logic and the supernatural. The forest, which had always been my ally, now seemed to conspire against me. With my heart racing and my mind in conflict, I knew that the only way to understand all of this was to confront the truth, no matter how frightening it was. Ethan's disappearance was not just an isolated case. It was part of something much larger, a mystery that extended beyond comprehension, and I was determined to uncover what had really happened that fateful night. The darkness around me became palpable, as if it were alive and breathing. Fear was growing inside me, and the feeling that something supernatural was unfolding before me was undeniable. The group, once united, was now dispersing in panic, each of them fighting their own demons while trying to find a way out of that cursed clearing. "Sam," I shouted, but he had disappeared into the darkness. The echo of my fear reverberated through the trees, responding with a whisper that seemed to mock my helplessness. What had happened to Ethan? What had he found that now surrounded us with so much hostility? The campfire still smoldered, but I didn't dare to approach it. Instead, I looked around, searching for any sign of my friends. Jenna was nearby, her eyes wide like those of a cornered deer. "We need to go now," she exclaimed, but her words were heavy with desperation. But the scream, "Ethan might be around here," I protested, feeling the urgency pulse in my veins. What had happened to him? The image of the woman I had seen earlier came back to my mind. The woman. She said Ethan was lost between worlds. I murmured, almost unwillingly. "You're going crazy," Jenna shouted, but there was something in her voice that made me hesitate. The legend speaks of an entity that feeds on despair. They say it lures people into the forest. A wave of understanding hit me. The stories we heard around the campfire, told by campers and old rangers, were not just stories. They were warnings. Something in that forest was more alive and more real than any of us could imagine. "We need to find Sam," I said, already turning in the direction where he had disappeared. But before we could move forward, a cold breeze blew, carrying with it a distant laugh that seemed to come from all sides. The shadows grew denser, and the feeling that we were being watched intensified. "Look," Jenna screamed, pointing to one of the trees. On its bark, there were strange shapes, carved as if someone had tried to leave a mark. As I approached, I realized that the marks resembled faces, twisted in expressions of pain and despair. This is what the legends speak of," I murmured, a chill running down my spine. Something was not right. The stories of disappearances, the accounts of people who entered the forest and never returned, were beginning to intertwine with my own reality. I was overcome by a feeling that the entity that had captured Ethan was now trying to trap us too. "We need to get out of here," Jenna insisted again, but I couldn't just leave. "Ethan is here. I can feel it. He needs us." The desperation in my voice echoed in the clearing, and the wind seemed to intensify, as if the forest itself was getting angry with my determination. It was then that I heard a whisper, almost inaudible, but familiar. "Help me." It was Ethan's voice, weak and distant, but clear enough to send shivers down my spine. "He's close," I shouted, ignoring the fear that was overtaking me. I needed to find him. Jenna hesitated, but the desperation in my eyes seemed to convince her. "Come on quickly." She turned and we started running in the direction where the sound seemed to come from. The trees closed in around us, the darkness becoming a threatening maze. Every step was a struggle against the growing pressure surrounding us, as if the forest itself was trying to swallow us. "Are you hearing this?" Jenna asked, her voice now trembling. Ethan's whisper echoed louder, but there was something else, a murmur that seemed to infiltrate our thoughts, suggesting doubts and fears we didn't even know we had. "Yes, but we need to keep going," I replied, forcing myself to ignore the voices that were becoming more insistent. "He's in danger." When we finally reached a small clearing, the air was heavy and the atmosphere was electric. In the center, a figure rose from the shadows, and my heart raced as I recognized Ethan, although his appearance was faded, as if he were just a shadow of himself. "Ethan," I shouted, but he didn't respond. He seemed lost in his own thoughts, his eyes vacant, as if he were struggling against something invisible. "What happened to you?" I approached, but an invisible force pushed me back. "Don't come close," came a voice, and when I looked back, I saw Sam, now pale and trembling with wide eyes. "He's not who you think he is anymore." A shock ran through my body. What did he mean by that? The feeling that we were in a nightmare only intensified. What was real and what wasn't? Ethan, the voice I had heard, the stories I had heard, everything was blending into a tangle of confusion. "Sam, you're wrong," I tried to argue, but a new wave of darkness was approaching, as if the forest was about to close in on us. What was really happening? Was it a battle for Ethan's soul? Or were we losing ourselves in a game of shadows we could never understand? And, more importantly, would we escape before the forest decided to claim us? Sam's words lingered in the air, heavy as the very silence that surrounded us. He is no longer who you think he is. The feeling that something was terribly wrong intensified within me. Ethan, whom I believed to be lost, had become a shadow of himself. But what did Sam mean? What could have changed my friend's essence so drastically? Sam, you're wrong. My voice came out louder than I intended, but urgency overwhelmed me. Ethan's figure twisted as if caught in an internal battle, his empty eyes reflecting indescribable pain. What had happened to him? What had this forest done? But then, the darkness around us began to stir. The trees seemed to lean in, as if they were listening to our words, and a low, almost childish laugh echoed among the trunks. It was a laughter that belonged to none of us. Fear took hold of me, and a wave of despair washed over me. "We need to get out of here," I shouted, but it was too late. Ethan took a step toward us, and at the same time, a shadow loomed behind him, as if the forest itself was trying to pull him back. "Help me." His voice, now distorted, echoed again. It was a cry for help, but also a warning. Something in his gaze made me hesitate. He was no longer just lost. He was being consumed. "Don't come closer," Sam shouted once more, but the urgency in his words wasn't enough to stop me. Something inside me wanted to believe that if we just reached Ethan, we could bring him back. The forest was alive, and the feeling of being watched intensified. An invisible presence moving around us, as if waiting for the right moment to strike. That's when I realized that the whisper I had heard before was not just Ethan's voice, but a chorus of voices, all crying for help, all lost among the trees. The legends we heard were not mere stories. They were disguised truths. The forest was filled with trapped souls, and Ethan could become one of them. "He's in danger, we need to help him," I pleaded, but as I approached, an invisible force pushed me back. I looked at Sam, and the expression on his face was one of panic. "You don't understand. The entity that possesses him feeds on his pain. If you get closer, it might take you too." Sam's words cut like a knife. I was about to get lost in the darkness, just like Ethan. The coldness of reality hit me. What I thought was a heroic quest to save my friend could turn into a deadly trap. Despair spread through me like a venomous snake. Then something changed. The shadow behind Ethan began to writhe and expand, revealing an indistinct yet clearly threatening shape. It was as if the darkness itself was taking form, an entity that fed on our fear. "You cannot save him. He is mine now," the voice echoed, soft and seductive, but filled with a malevolence that sent chills down my spine. Ethan's body swayed, and a look of struggle crossed his face. He was there, but at the same time he wasn't. Whatever had taken him was trying to manifest, and what I saw was no longer my friend. It was a distorted echo of the person I once knew, trapped in a sea of shadows. "No," I screamed, but the entity's voice resonated again. "You cannot save him. Despair feeds him, and he is now part of me." Feeling the pressure mounting, I realized that the only way to save Ethan was to confront this entity. I needed to understand what was really happening. "Ethan," I called, trying to reach the part of him that was still there. "Fight this. You are not alone." But the entity laughed, a laughter that seemed to swallow the very light. "He cannot hear you. He is mine, and you will be too." The tension escalated, and the darkness began to close in, forming claws that seemed ready to seize us. The air was heavy, and I felt that at any moment we could be dragged into that darkness, lost forever. The forest was alive, and now it didn't just want Ethan. It wanted all of us. "Sam, we need to go," I shouted, pulling him in the opposite direction, but something held me back. A powerful force pinned me in place, as if the forest was determined to keep us there. It was then that a disturbing vision flashed in my mind. The shadows of the forest not only imprisoned but also manipulated. They were the lost souls of all who had come before us, now coming together to form something greater, a collective consciousness of despair and pain. The revelation hit me like a lightning bolt. The forest didn't just kidnap. It was building an army of shadows. The voices I had heard, the whispers for help, all were part of a larger plan. If we couldn't escape, we would become part of that legend. More lost souls among the trees, and the entity would gain more power. "Sam, we have to get out now," I shouted, adrenaline coursing through my veins. We needed to break this connection before it was too late. With one last look at Ethan, a determination formed within me. I couldn't leave him behind, but I also couldn't be consumed. With a burst of energy, I pulled Sam and we ran toward the exit, the darkness pursuing us fiercely. But now I knew that the fight was not just for survival. It was a battle against the fate the forest had chosen for us. The echo of our voices mingled with the entity's whisper, but it wouldn't be the last scream. I was determined to find a way to break this curse and save not just Ethan, but everyone who had gotten lost there. The forest roared around us, and the urgency in my chest turned into an insistent drumbeat. Shadows moved like serpents, trying to envelop us in their suffocating embrace, and the entity's laughter echoed in my mind, threatening to destabilize me with every step we took. I needed a plan, a solution, something that could break the cycle of despair that the forest imposed on us. "Sam, we need to find a way to free Ethan." My voice sounded almost desperate, but there was a spark of determination burning inside me. "He's still there somewhere. If we can make the entity realize that we're not afraid, maybe we can get him out of there." Sam hesitated, his eyes wide, as if he were trying to process what I had said. What if the entity feeds on our fear? What if it gets us before we can do anything? His words hit me, but I didn't have time to hesitate. We need to be faster than it is. If we can make Ethan hear our voice, maybe he can fight it. He's stronger than he thinks. I ran back toward Ethan, the shadow behind him writhing, trying to push me away. "Ethan, listen to me. You're stronger than this. Fight against the pain. Fight against the darkness," I shouted, but the entity seemed to relish my despair, its claws extending, trying to pull me into its abyss. The feeling of being watched intensified, as if the forest was delighting in our suffering. But I couldn't let doubt creep into my heart. "Ethan, you're not alone," my voice echoed, and for a moment, I saw a glimmer of recognition in his eyes, but it was soon overshadowed by darkness. The internal battle within me intensified. I was fighting against fear, against the possibility that I would never see my friend as he truly was again. The vision of Ethan, lost and consumed, was eating away at me. "You can't give up." I was terrified, but I needed to act. I needed to do something. "Sam, if we can find a way to break the bond between the entity and Ethan, maybe we can save him." An idea began to form in my mind, but it would require courage. Courage I wasn't sure I had. The voices around us became a deafening chorus, crying for help and mingling with the entity's laughter. Each scream was a reminder of what we were about to lose. "But how?" Sam asked, his voice trembling. "What do we do exactly?" Maybe we have to confront the entity," I suggested, already knowing how risky that was. "If we can understand what it wants, we might find a way to free Ethan." Sam looked at me, the expression on his face a mix of disbelief and fear. "What if it gets us? What if we can't come back?" The doubt weighed on my heart, but the image of Ethan writhing under the entity's influence was enough to propel me forward. "We have to do this. For him, for everyone trapped here. We can't let him become another lost soul." With one last look at Sam, I took a deep breath, feeling the adrenaline coursing through my veins. The forest was alive, and I needed to connect with its essence, with the pain that fed it. "Entity, I know you're here. Show yourself," I shouted, my voice echoing among the trees. The laughter stopped abruptly, and the shadow behind Ethan began to writhe more aggressively. "Do you really think you can challenge me? You're just a lost child in a world you don't understand." "I may not understand, but I know you feed on despair. Is that what you want? Nas souls?" My voice trembled, but I continued, determined. Ethan is not yours. He is my friend, and I won't let him be consumed. The shadow hesitated, as if considering my words. A weight built up in the air, and I realized that the entity was not invincible. It was fed by our fears, and now I was throwing her game back at her. You can't control him. He is mine now. The entity's voice resonated, but there was a weakness in it that I had not noticed before. No, he is still here, I shouted, trying to reach the part of Ethan that still resisted. Fight, Ethan. You are stronger than this. Don't let the darkness consume you. The shadows began to stir, and the entity's laughter turned into a scream of rage. You don't understand. For every soul you save, one must be lost. I felt my heart race. What was this dark truth? I was willing to sacrifice everything. But what about Sam? What if he became the next victim? I can't let you take anyone else, I shouted, knowing that the battle was just beginning. Time was running out, and the only thing I knew was that I needed to fight, not just for Ethan, but for all of us. The forest seemed to pulse around us, a dark and beating heart that fed on our fears. Each step I took toward the shadow enveloping Ethan was like walking on a minefield, every whisper of the entity echoing in my mind, trying to steer me off course. You cannot save what already belongs to me, it thundered, and the voice was a mix of pain and pleasure, as if each word was made of suffering. You are wrong, I shouted, adrenaline burning in my lungs. Every word I uttered was a blow against the darkness threatening to swallow us. Ethan can fight. He has a strength you will never be able to consume. The shadow writhed, almost as if it were squeezing the essence out of Ethan, and I could see his struggle, the way he was trying to break free. The entity's claws dug deeper, as if they wanted to tear his soul from his body. You do not understand what you are facing, the entity hissed, its form rising and gaining substance. It was a grotesque figure, an amalgamation of distorted faces and eyes that shone with insatiable hatred. I am the darkness that lives in every heart. I am fear, despair, pain, and you are here offering resistance? It's hilarious, but her laughter did not discourage me. On the contrary, the anger grew within me like a fire I didn't know I had. If you are fear, then I am courage, and I will not let you take Ethan. What I said was not just a shout of defiance. It was an affirmation. I needed to believe in the strength that still remained in Ethan. Courage? The entity laughed, and the laughter reverberated through the trees, making the leaves tremble. Courage is an illusion. The reality is that you are about to lose everything. In that moment, I felt the truth of those words pierce my heart. What would happen if I failed? What would happen if, in trying to save Ethan, I lost him forever? But there was no choice. Despair was not an option. Ethan, listen, I shouted again, my voice cutting through the darkness. I am here. Fight against the darkness. You are stronger than anything this entity can do to you. There was a pause, and for a brief moment, the shadow hesitated. Ethan's gaze lit up with a fraction of clarity, as if he were remembering who he truly was. He murmured, his voice almost faded, but there was a spark, a resistance that gave me hope. Yes, that's it. Fight, Ethan. Don't let her control you. The shadow around him began to stir, as if it were losing its grip. The entity, sensing the change, screamed furiously. You cannot save him. He belongs to me. You have no power here. I have power, I retorted, feeling a wave of determination consume me. I will not let you win. And then, with every ounce of strength I had, I moved forward, feeling the energy of the forest intensifying around me. The darkness was closing in, but I could not back down. The entity lunged at me, its claws stretching out like tentacles. I could feel the air around me fill with its hatred, but something inside me ignited. I was not alone. Sam was there by my side, and together we were more than just flesh and bone. We were the light against the darkness. Now, Sam, I shouted, and we both raised our hands, channeling all our energy into a single scream. Release Ethan. Light burst forth from us, a wave of heat and brightness that illuminated the forest like a rising sun. The shadow screamed, writhing under the pressure of our combined power. No, this is not possible. The entity seemed to lose its shape, the distorted faces fading away, revealing the essence that had been corrupted. You cannot control the light, I shouted, and the force emanating from us began to envelop Ethan, pulling him to the surface, to reality. He was struggling, but now there was a spark of hope in his eyes. Fight, Ethan, come to us. And then, in a climax of light and darkness, Ethan emerged from its claws, his body trembling but free. He looked at me, and in the depths of his eyes, there was a determination I had never seen before. Thank you, he whispered, and together, the three of us faced the entity. With one last scream of rage, the shadow dissolved, and the malevolent laughter turned into a distant echo, as if the forest was finally freeing itself from a weight that had oppressed it for so long. The silence that followed was almost deafening, but there was a lightness in the air, a feeling that we had won a battle that seemed lost. But the fight was not over. The echo of the entity still resonated in my mind, and I knew that for every victory, there was a new challenge. But in that moment, we were together, and together we were stronger. The light that had emerged from us slowly dissipated, leaving behind a residue of warmth and a strange calm in the forest. I felt exhausted. The adrenaline that had been pulsing through my veins began to fade, and with it, the awareness of what we had truly faced. Ethan was by my side, his gaze still distant, as if he were trying to process everything that had happened. I felt his body trembling, but it was not just the cold. It was the battle that still burned in our memory, a fight that would leave marks on our souls. The air was heavy with the fragrance of damp wood, and the ground beneath our feet still vibrated with the energy of the struggle. I looked around, searching for any sign of the entity that had tried to consume us, but all I found was an oppressive silence and a forest that seemed to have regained some of its peace. However, I knew that this peace was illusory. What had just happened could not be forgotten. Ethan, I called, my voice barely reaching beyond those immense trees. He turned his gaze to me, and I saw a mix of gratitude and pain on his face. The shadow of that fight still loomed over us. Are you okay? He hesitated, taking a deep breath, as if the question required more than a simple answer. I don't know, he finally replied, his voice trembling. I felt lost, as if I were sinking into an abyss and, at the same time, struggling to return to the surface. And then you appeared. The shine in his eyes was a sign that he was still battling the memories of the darkness that had tried to overpower him. I didn't let you get lost. You fought, I said, trying to convey the strength that I still felt pulsing within me. But at the same time, I knew that what we had faced had left deep scars. The battle was not just physical. It had transformed us in ways we still did not understand. That thing, it said it was the darkness that lives in each of us, Ethan murmured, looking at the ground. What if it's right? What if this is part of me now? There was an anguish in his voice that cut through me like a blade. No, Ethan, what it said isn't true. You are more than that. I wanted to scream, wanted him to see the truth, but doubt hung over us like a dense fog. What had happened in the forest would mark us, and there was no way to go back to who we were before. I remembered the entity's claws, how they had dug into him, and a chill ran down my spine. What if it comes back? What if there are more like it? The questions echoed in my mind, but there were no answers. There was an unbearable emptiness, a raw truth that left us unprotected. Maybe we have to prepare, Ethan said, and I realized that he was also fighting against his own demons. But what about you? How are you dealing with all of this? The question caught me off guard. I had focused so much on Ethan that I hadn't stopped to think about myself. The battle had left me with a deep sense of fatigue, but it was not just physical. It was an emotional exhaustion that seeped into every fiber of my being. I don't know, I replied, my voice barely a whisper. I feel like something inside me has changed. The forest will never feel the same again, and I won't be the same. She nodded, and together we stood there, immersed in a silence that spoke more than any words could. It was a connection that transcended what we had faced, a mutual understanding that we were survivors, but not without scars. As I looked toward the horizon, the daylight began to fade, casting long shadows that danced around us. I didn't know what awaited us, but there was one thing I understood. The fight against the darkness was not over, and the feeling that something was watching us, always lurking, would never completely disappear. And so we left the forest, but not as we were before. We carried with us not only the memory of the battle, but also the awareness that light and darkness coexist in each of us, and that the struggle for our own essence never truly ends. As we left the forest, the feeling that something was changing inside me intensified with every step. Ethan walked beside me, but the emotional distance between us seemed to grow, as if the battle we had faced was separating us even more. What had been a fight for survival was now transforming into an internal struggle, and I didn't know if we could get through this together. The sky above us darkened, and the stars began to emerge, one by one, like small beacons in the darkness. I looked at their glow and wondered if, even in the dark, there was still hope. What the entity had said resonated in my mind. The darkness that lives in each of us. It was a terrifying thought, and the more I thought about it, the more doubt took root within me. "Ethan," I called, trying to break the silence that surrounded us. "Do you think we can win this internal battle? That we can overcome the darkness that has been revealed to us?" He looked at me, and for a moment, I saw a spark of determination in his eyes. "I want to believe we can," he replied, his voice steady. "But we can't ignore that it's there, that it's part of who we are. What matters is how we choose to deal with it." His words echoed within me, awakening a new perspective. It was true that the darkness was a part of us, but we were also made of light. As we continued walking, the forest began to seem less threatening, as if the echoes of the battle were fading away. But inside, I knew the fight was not over. Whatever we had faced had left scars, and although darkness was a part of us, there was also light, a light we needed to find again, not just within ourselves, but in each other. As we reached the edge of the forest, the full moon lit the path ahead, and a sense of renewal began to form in my heart. The world around us was at peace, but I knew that the true battle was the one we fought within ourselves. I looked at Ethan and realized that, despite everything, we were stronger together. And even though the shadow of darkness still lingered, we had the capacity to support one another. "Let's face this together," I declared, feeling the strength of my determination solidify. "If darkness is part of us, then we must also learn to dance with the light." He smiled, and for the first time since our battle, I saw a genuine spark in his eyes. It was a sign that hope still existed. As we moved away from the forest, I knew that the journey ahead would be filled with challenges, but we were ready to face them. Life is made of shadows and lights, and perhaps true strength lies in the ability to balance them. But as I walked toward the future, a troubling thought settled in my heart. What if the darkness we faced was just hiding, waiting for a moment of weakness to return? The thought made me hesitate, but at the same time, it gave me a new determination. I couldn't allow fear to dominate my life. We needed to be vigilant, but also learn to live. And so, as we left that place, we not only left behind fear, but also made a silent pact. We would each fight against our own demons, but always together. Darkness might try to consume us, but the light we found in each other would be our armor. And if you have faced your own darkness, I invite you to share your story in the comments. Together, we can find strength and light in each other's experiences. We cannot let fear paralyze us. Like this video and subscribe to the channel so we can continue to explore the complexities of life together. Every interaction helps bring more content that unites us amid the darkness. Let's move forward together. What happens when nature, in its majestic beauty, hides secrets that can cost lives? I, a forest ranger at Redwood National Park, often wonder about this as I walk the trails that wind between the majestic sequoias. One day, while watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, I received a call that would change everything. Someone had gone missing. It was not the first time this had happened in this park, but there was something different about this occurrence that left me uneasy. The name of the missing person was Austin Miller, a young man who used to visit the park frequently, a true nature lover. Hearing his name, I felt a strange connection. Austin always spoke about how he felt more alive among the trees, as if they had a power that drew him in. Now, that power seemed to have swallowed him whole. The authorities were already on their way, but I couldn't shake the idea that there was something deeper here, something that required my attention. As I walked the trails that Austin used to explore, a feeling of discomfort began to accompany me. The wind whispered through the leaves, and I could swear I heard Austin's laughter echoing in the breeze. I couldn't help but think that the park held secrets intertwined with his disappearance. What could have happened? The nature that was a refuge now felt like a labyrinth of uncertainties. The sun quickly set, plunging everything into a darkness that was both beautiful and frightening. The first night searching for Austin was marked by a thick fog that seemed to envelop the park. With each step, I felt more and more lost, not just physically but also emotionally. The radio buzzed with the voices of other rangers, but whenever I tried to focus on the instructions, my mind drifted to Austin's last words about how the forest made him feel alive. What could have drawn him even further away from us? The next morning, I decided to follow a less traveled trail, one that Austin had mentioned in a casual conversation about places where he felt more connected to the earth. As I walked, the vegetation grew denser, and the trees seemed to close in around me, as if they were guarding a secret only they knew. The atmosphere was charged, as if nature itself were watching my movements. Then, something caught my attention. A piece of clothing, a blue jacket that I immediately recognized as Austin's. My heart raced as I picked the fabric up between my fingers. Fear and hope intertwined within me. What had happened to him? The feeling that he was still nearby was palpable, but at the same time, the anguish of his absence consumed me. I began to shout his name, echoing among the trees, hoping that somehow he could hear. As the day wore on, the search intensified, but darkness began to settle in again. The sun hid behind the mountains, and I knew I couldn't continue for much longer. With each step, the idea that something supernatural might be at play haunted me. Legends about the park spoke of spirits that protected the forest, luring the unwary into their grasp. Was Austin merely lost? Or was there something more? That night, while camping in a clearing, a sense of presence enveloped me. I looked around, and for a moment, I thought I saw a figure among the trees. My heart raced, and adrenaline made my body vibrate. "Austin," I shouted, but the only response was the distant echo of my own voice. The forest was alive, pulsating, and I was just an intruder in its domain. The search continued for days, and frustration consumed me. The park, which had once been a place of beauty, had become a scene of despair. The nights were long, and the silence seemed to scream Austin's name. What I didn't know was that the answer I sought was closer than I imagined. In a moment of clarity, I realized that the forest was not just a physical maze, but also a representation of the fears and desires within each of us. Finally, after days of searching, a rescue team found Austin. He was in a small cave, deep in the heart of the forest, lost but not hurt. When I saw him, a wave of relief and confusion washed over me. He looked different, as if he had found something I couldn't understand. "I didn't want to come back," he whispered, and in that moment, I realized that nature had a power that few could comprehend. Austin had gotten lost, but perhaps in his search, he had also found something that transformed him forever. The park remains a place of beauty and mystery, but now, every time I walk its trails, I feel a shadow of apprehension. What else might be hidden in the depths of the trees? What more could nature teach us about ourselves? The search for Austin had become an obsession for me. I was not just looking for a missing friend. I was engaged in a silent battle against the forest, a living entity that guarded its secrets with an almost palpable fervor. In the days that followed his rescue, things began to change. There was something in the air, a tension that was building like a storm about to burst. One night, while trying to rest in my cabin, I was interrupted by a loud knock on the door. It was Sarah, another forest ranger and my longtime friend. Her face was pale, and her eyes reflected a fear I couldn't ignore. "You need to come with me," she said, her voice trembling. Something is happening on the trails near the cave where they found Austin. I followed Sarah without hesitation. As we walked, the woods seemed denser, as if the trees were moving to block our path. The wind howled, and the sound of rustling leaves resembled whispers. The place where Austin had been found was now a focal point of strangeness. With each step, a growing feeling of discomfort swelled inside me. When we reached the entrance of the cave, I hesitated. Something told me it wasn't just a cave. It was a portal to something beyond the world we knew. "I found this," Sarah said, holding a small, shining stone in her hand. It was a polished stone with colors that changed as the light hit it. Austin had been obsessed with this. He believed it had special powers. The stone seemed to pulse, and as I held it, a wave of energy coursed through my body. A feeling of déjà vu washed over me, as if I had been there before, in a moment I couldn't identify. As we entered the cave, an intense cold enveloped us. The darkness was almost tangible, and the walls seemed to close in on us. As we moved deeper, I noticed strange markings on the rocks, symbols I had never seen before. "What are these markings?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't know," Sarah replied, "but some people in town talk about them. They say they are ancient, connected to nature worship rituals." As we explored further, I began to hear whispers. They weren't voices, but rather a sound that seemed to come from the very earth. "Are you hearing this?" I asked Sarah, but she was focused on her own search. The atmosphere was charged with tension, and the feeling that we were being watched grew stronger with each moment. I paused and looked back, sensing that something or someone was following us. Then, a sharp scream echoed through the cave. It was a human sound, but distorted, almost as if it were being pulled away. Fear overtook me, and I hurried toward the source of the sound. The cave was narrowing, and the darkness was becoming more oppressive. When we finally reached a small chamber lit by a strange green light, we found Austin, or what remained of him. He was sitting against the wall, eyes wide, fixated on something we couldn't see. "Austin," I shouted, but he didn't respond. He seemed to be in a trance, as if he were listening to something we couldn't hear. I looked around and realized the room was filled with stones similar to the one Sarah had found. They all pulsed in a hypnotic rhythm. "What happened to you?" I asked, but he didn't seem to hear me. Instead, he began murmuring something in a language I didn't recognize. At that moment, the cave began to tremble. The walls vibrated, and a deafening sound filled the space. The green light intensified, and a shadow began to form before us. An indistinct figure that seemed to twist and shape itself. The air grew heavy, and the smell of wet earth filled our nostrils. "We need to get out of here," I shouted to Sarah, but she was frozen, as if hypnotized by the light. The figure approached, and in an instant, everything went silent. What surrounded me was a feeling of clarity, as if the forest itself was revealing itself. I saw flashes of memories, of Austin laughing among the trees, of moments of pure joy, but I also sensed something dark. Nature had a duality, a power that could heal or destroy. I was at the center of a conflict much greater than I had imagined. With a desperate impulse, I grabbed Sarah's hand and pulled her out of the chamber. We ran through the narrow passages of the cave, the sound of our own fear echoing around us. The green light began to fade, and the figure dissolved into shadows, but not before I felt there was a connection, a promise of return. When we finally emerged from the cave, the moon shone brightly above us. The forest was silent, but something had changed. I knew that the search for Austin was not over. There was much more to discover, and the forest still held secrets that would challenge everything I thought I knew about life and death, about nature and the supernatural. The connection Austin had made was alive, and I was determined to understand. The fear still pulsed in my veins as Sarah and I ran out of the cave, but the adrenaline was soon replaced by a sense of urgency. We needed to understand what we had just witnessed. What happened to Austin? And who or what was that figure? The forest around us was silent, but I knew the calm was deceptive. Something was about to happen. As soon as we reached the clearing, I decided that we couldn't just go back to the cabin and ignore what we saw. Sarah, we need to go back to town and talk to people who know these legends, I said, trying to stay calm. She nodded, but still seemed distant, as if the experience in the cave had left deep marks on her mind. The town was shrouded in a fog of tension. What had once been a quiet place was now filled with whispers and curious glances. Upon entering the local library, we found some residents gathered, fervently discussing what was happening in the forest. Murmurs about disappearances and sightings of strange lights circulated among them. We need information, I said to Sarah. Let's ask someone who knows these stories. As we walked, we encountered old Tom, a local hunter who always talked about the ancient legends of the forest. He was sitting at a table, watching the commotion with a skeptical look. You two are here to hear ghost stories, aren't you? Tom said with an ironic smile. But upon seeing the seriousness in our faces, his smile faded. What happened in the cave? He asked, curiosity mingling with fear. We found Austin, I said, trying not to reveal how shaken I was. But he wasn't well. There was a green light and a figure. What do you know about this? Tom hesitated, looking around before whispering. That light, it has been seen before. They say it's a sign that something ancient is awakening in the forest. Something that shouldn't be disturbed. The marks you saw, they are linked to a ritual that has been forgotten for a long time. Ritual? What kind of ritual? I asked, curiosity mixed with fear. And what does this have to do with the disappearances? The disappearances, they are not just random. There's a pattern. Those who venture too far into the trails, who feel drawn to the forest, they are chosen. The forest demands a sacrifice, something that keeps it alive. Tom explained, his voice low and grave. As Tom spoke, reality began to mold into something darker. I remembered the stories my grandmother told about the forest, as if it were a living being with its own desires. Austin wasn't the first, I murmured to myself. He was obsessed with that stone, and perhaps it drew the forest's attention. Tom's expression turned grim. If you don't do something, he may not be the last. The forest is alive, and it senses weakness. You need to find Austin before it's too late. I felt a wave of despair. How could I rescue Austin if he was under the influence of something so powerful? But a part of me knew I couldn't give up. We need to go back to the cave, I declared. We have to face this. If the forest is demanding something, maybe we can negotiate. If Austin is tied to this, maybe he holds the key. Sarah looked at me, hesitant. What if we're not able to bring him back? What if the forest doesn't let us leave again? We have to try, I insisted. There was no other choice. The truth was that with each passing moment, the connection between Austin and that entity was growing stronger. And if he was losing himself, he would become one of them, part of something greater and more terrible. We set off, determined to confront our fears. As we walked back to the forest, a sense of inevitability swept over me. The forest was preparing to welcome us, and I knew that whatever was lurking didn't just want Austin, but all of us. The trees seemed to close in around us, as if they were absorbing us. And as we reached the entrance of the cave, the green light began to shine brightly, as if it were calling us. The echo of our past and the weight of our future awaited us in the depths. The forest demanded the truth, and we were about to discover that the line between friend and foe, between life and death, had dissolved. As we ventured deeper into the cave, the atmosphere grew heavier, as if the very earth was breathing around us. The green light pulsed, now more intense, like a heart beating with a life of its own. I looked at Sarah, feeling the tension between us. Adrenaline still coursed through my veins, but doubt began to settle in. What exactly were we about to face? As we went further in, the light intensified, illuminating the damp walls of the cave and revealing ancient runes etched into the rocks. They seemed to tell a story, but I couldn't decipher them. It was then that I heard a whisper, soft and almost melodic, seeming to emanate from the light itself. "Free me," the voice echoed, reverberating off the cave walls. My heart raced. Sarah looked at me, her eyes wide. "Did you hear that?" "Yes," I replied, unsure if it was a good or bad sign. "Who's there?" The light began to shimmer, forming a silhouette. It was a feminine figure, ethereal and sorrowful. with eyes that seemed to shine like stars. "I am the guardian of this place, and you have been chosen for a mission," she said, her voice now clearer, yet equally distant. "Austin is not who you think he is." Her words hung in the air, like a cloud weighing down on us. "What do you mean?" I asked, unsure whether I should feel fear or hope. "The forest is not just a place. It is a being, and Austin is a part of it now. He was drawn by a power he did not understand, and now he holds a secret that may save or condemn you all. But he is in danger," I exclaimed, feeling a wave of despair. "How can we bring him back?" The guardian hesitated, as if weighing her words. "The key to freeing him lies in the runes. They speak of a pact made long ago, a pact that has kept him bound to the forest. If you cannot break it, Austin will become one with the forest and lose his humanity forever." "How can we break this pact?" Sarah asked, determination beginning to form in her gaze. "You must confront the truth of what you found in the cave. What is hidden in the depths of the forest is a part of yourselves, something you fear. Only then can you free Austin," the guardian replied, before disappearing in a burst of green light. A deathly silence settled, and I looked at the runes. They seemed to pulse, as if waiting for us. "What do you think this means?" I asked Sarah, but the question echoed in my mind, bringing a new terror. "Maybe we have to confront our own fears," she murmured, her voice trembling slightly. "What don't we want to face?" Panic began to set in. I recalled moments in my life that had marked me. Fears I hid, traumas I didn't want to remember. "But this could destroy us," I said, my voice filled with despair. "What if we can't handle it?" "We have to try," Sarah insisted, and I realized she was right. The only way to save Austin was to face what the forest was demanding. Feeling a growing determination, I approached the first rune and touched it. Immediately, a wave of energy coursed through my body, and visions began to emerge, distorted yet vivid. I saw Austin, not as the friend we knew, but as a shadow, a part of the forest, an extension of something much more terrible. I saw the people who had disappeared, all of them becoming part of the forest, whispering in despair, but also in peace. "No, we can't let this happen," I shouted, and the pulsing light responded, vibrating at a frequency that almost brought me to my knees. "You must decide." The guardian's voice returned, echoing in my mind. "Choose between love and fear." I realized, in a moment of clarity, that what was at stake was not just Austin's life, but my own. The fear I held inside was the true prison. I was allowing it to control me, preventing me from acting. "Come on, Sarah. We need to do this together," I said, determination rising in my chest. With a swift movement, I touched the remaining runes, and a wave of light enveloped us. The visions intensified, and I saw the forest stir, as if it were alive and aware of our presence. Then, a scream echoed, and Austin's figure appeared, bloodied and disoriented. "Help me," he shouted, his voice distorted by pain and fear. The forest was reacting, and I realized that what once seemed like a simple rescue was now becoming a battle for his soul, a struggle against what the forest desired. "You cannot have us," I yelled, and the green light began to transform into a storm of energy, a confrontation between darkness and light. "You are next," the voice of the forest whispered in my ear, and I knew I had to fight, not just for Austin, but for myself. The battle was just beginning. My heart raced in a frantic rhythm, and the green light of the cave seemed to stir in response to my growing anguish. Austin's figure stood before me, his essence distorted, as if he were trapped in a net of shadows and despair. The forest was alive, and its invisible claws were closing in on us. What I saw was not just an image. It was a manifestation of what the forest desired: to consume. "Help me," he shouted again, and I felt a wave of helplessness. What could I do? What did I know about ancient magic and pacts? The runes began to glow even more intensely, and the forest seemed to whisper, instigating the doubt that already resided in my heart. "You cannot save him," the voice echoed, and I felt paralyzed by uncertainty. No, I will not give up. I took a deep breath, trying to push away the doubt that threatened to swallow me. Time was running out, and the urgency to act grew with each passing second. I needed a plan, a solution, but the darkness around me was intensifying, and visions of my own weaknesses began to emerge. What if I failed? What if my attempt to save Austin only condemned him further? You are not strong enough, the voice of the forest whispered, like poison seeping into my thoughts. I remembered all the times I had hesitated, when I let fear take over. Failure, losses, unfulfilled promises. All of it came together in an almost unbearable emotional storm. You must confront your fears, the guardian had said. That statement echoed in my mind, but how could I do that now, when everything was at stake? The green light seemed to pulse with a stronger rhythm, as if challenging me to act. I needed to confront not only the forest, but also what was within me. I am not weak, I shouted into the darkness, feeling anger and determination swell in my chest. I will not let you take Austin. With a decisive movement, I touched the next rune, and a wave of energy coursed through my body, revealing a new vision. This time, I saw myself younger, hesitant in crucial moments. I saw the faces of people I had disappointed, moments when I had failed to act out of fear. Each image was a knife cutting through my heart. You are next. The voice of the forest spirit echoed again, and a wave of despair threatened to engulf me. You cannot escape who you are. I was being confronted with the darkest truth. The guilt I held, the insecurity that consumed me, and the fear of not being enough. This was not just a fight for Austin, but a battle for my own soul. I am not defined by my fears, I shouted, trying to find an anchor amidst the storm of emotions. The green light seemed to hesitate, and I realized that the forest was also feeling my resistance. If I wanted to save Austin, I needed to strengthen myself. I needed to believe that I had the power to change things. Let's do this together, Austin, I cried, gathering all the strength that remained in me. The pulsing light began to transform, and I felt a connection with Austin, as if he were hearing my call. I will fight for you. The battle intensified. The runes began to glow more brightly, and the space around us twisted, as if the cave itself was divided between light and darkness. Confront what you fear. The guardian's voice resonated again, and I realized that the key to freeing Austin lay in facing my own fear. I will not let you control me, I declared, and I touched the final rune, feeling a wave of warm and invigorating energy envelop me. What was lost in me began to return, and an intense light burst from within, illuminating the darkness around us. The presence of the forest began to waver, and Austin's cry intensified, now filled with hope. I am here. I am fighting for you, I shouted, and the green light pulsed with renewed strength. The shadows began to disperse, and Austin's figure started to materialize more clearly, as I felt the weight of my fears dissipating. But the battle was not won. The forest still resonated with its strength, and I knew I would need more than just determination. I needed courage, a true connection, and the only way to do that was to unite my light with his. Together, Austin, let's get out of here together, I cried, and a wave of energy enveloped us, the light pulsing like a beacon in the darkness. The forest was writhing, but we were fighting together. And in that moment, I realized that true strength did not come from the absence of fear, but from the courage to face it. The intense light that emanated from us seemed to challenge the darkness that spread throughout the cave. The air was charged with a palpable electricity, and the presence of the forest became almost physical, a force that pulsed and twisted around us. The shadows danced, as if they were alive, trying to grasp at me, but I refused to yield. I had a goal: to save Austin. Do you really think you can defeat me? The voice of the forest echoed, now closer, more threatening. I felt its power, a manifestation of all the fears and doubts I had carried for so long. The invisible claws of darkness tried to pull me down, but the light that emanated from me and Austin was a shield, and I bore it like armor. I am not alone, I declared, feeling the connection between us strengthen. Every word I spoke was like a blow against the darkness. Austin, you are with me. Together we are stronger. His response seemed to resonate in the cavern, an undeniable echo of determination. The green light began to stir, a sign that the forest was losing ground. You don't know who you're dealing with, the voice of the forest whispered, now almost a growl. I am the essence of this land. I am your manifested fears. The shadows stirred, trying to envelop me in their cold claws, but I was not willing to back down. I remembered all the moments I let fear dominate me, and how that had driven me away from who I truly was. I was no longer that person. I am no longer weak, I shouted, and the light around me shone brighter. You cannot control me. The energy emanating from me seemed to amplify, and the runes in the cave began to resonate, responding to my determination. With a firm gesture, I touched a symbol I had not yet activated, and a wave of light exploded, enveloping the cave in a golden glow. The presence of the forest hesitated, and I saw a crack form in the shadows. You cannot escape who you are. The voice of the forest became a gasping scream, almost desperate. You will always be the one who failed. The words cut like knives, but instead of bringing me down, they reignited a flame within me. I was not just the sum of my failures. I was also hope, struggle, the strength that emerged after every fall. I am more than my mistakes, I asserted, my voice firm and clear. I am the choice to fight, to win. The golden light radiated with renewed strength, and in that moment, I realized that the forest was not just an evil entity, but a manifestation of everything I had not resolved within myself. You are part of me, but I will not be controlled by you, I declared, and the cave trembled in response. The shadows began to shrink, and Austin's figure became clearer, more real. I am here. I am with you. His voice echoed, full of courage and determination. Together, we were building a barrier of light that challenged the darkness. The forest roared, a deafening sound that reverberated off the walls of the cave, as if trying to knock us down. You will not stop us, I shouted, and in a surge, I channeled all the light I emanated towards the darkness. It was as if the cave was splitting, the shadows twisting and disintegrating. As I felt the pain and weakness dissipate from me, the light expanded, forming a devastating wave that swept everything in its path. You cannot destroy me. The voice of the forest now sounded desperate, a last effort to keep us under its control. But I was determined. I am no longer the prey. I am the hunter. The light took form, enveloping Austin and me in a warm and protective embrace. With one last cry of determination, I channeled everything I had learned, all the strength I had found within me, and together we launched the light into the darkness. A blinding glow erupted, and the shadows began to fade, dissolving into a sea of shimmering particles. The cave trembled, and I felt the presence of the forest fade away, like a distant echo. You have won, but this is not over. The voice of the forest dissolved into a whisper, and with that, the darkness finally receded. When the light finally settled, the cave was now bathed in a soft and welcoming glow. Austin was by my side, clearer and stronger than ever. We were both panting, but victory was in our hearts. I had faced not only the forest, but also the fears that had imprisoned me. And with that, I found the true strength that had always been within me. When the light finally settled, the echo of the battle still reverberated within me. The cave, now illuminated, seemed innocuous and peaceful, but I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. I looked at Austin. His gaze reflected the same mix of relief and unease that I felt. We had won, but the cost of that victory was deep and painful. The air was charged with a strange energy, a tension that I couldn't dissipate. Every breath I took seemed to remind me of the confrontation, that intense struggle against the darkness that had tried to devour me. The scars were not visible, but I knew they were there, marked on my soul. The battle had left an indelible impression, a feeling that nestled in my chest, a shadow that, though no longer threatening, would never completely leave me. Are you okay? Austin asked, his concern bringing me a bit of comfort. But the truth was that I didn't know if I was okay. The victory over the forest did not erase the echoes of its words, the whispers of my failures and fears that still seemed to resonate in my mind. Yes, I replied, but the uncertainty in my heart contradicted my answer. I had faced the darkness, but the darkness had also found me. As we left the cave, the daylight enveloped us like a warm embrace, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the world around us had changed. The trees seemed taller, the shadows deeper, and the breeze carried a whisper that reminded me of the forest and the battle we fought. Nature, once a refuge, was now a constant reminder of the internal struggle I still faced. We need to talk about what happened, Austin said, breaking the silence. He seemed as shaken as I was, his voice laden with a gravity I couldn't ignore. We faced something that goes beyond what we can understand. I agreed, but the words escaped me. What could we really say about what we experienced? How could we explain the pain and the revelation that still intertwined in my mind? The stunning victory over the forest left an emptiness within me. The mystery that had surrounded us had dissipated, but the price we paid was a sense of loss. I had hoped to find answers, but instead, we emerged with more questions. Why did the forest manifest that way? What was that entity that had tried to dominate us? And, more importantly, what had I lost in myself during the struggle? In the days that followed, the feeling of being watched became a constant. Every time I looked at the forest, I felt as if it were watching me, waiting for a moment of weakness. The nights were particularly difficult when the silence became deafening and the echoes of the battle reverberated in my thoughts. I couldn't forget what I had seen, the shadows dancing, the fight for my own soul. What had once been a place of tranquility now brought me a sense of unease. The memories of the cave haunted me, and I knew that nothing could erase what I had experienced. The spirit of the forest, though appeased, had left its marks on me. I would no longer be the same person who entered that cave. Something in my essence had changed forever. Do you think we are free from it? Austin asked one night as we gazed at the stars. The sky seemed so vast and indifferent, and I wondered if there was an answer to that question. I don't know, I replied honestly. I think darkness never completely ceases to exist. It just hides, waiting for the opportunity to return. He nodded, and the sadness in his eyes reflected the reality we both needed to face. Our struggle was not over. It had merely changed form. I then understood that the true battle would be the one we fought within ourselves, the struggle to not let the shadows define us. The cave and the forest became part of who we were, and though we had survived, the journey of understanding and acceptance would be long and complicated. As we walked together into the unknown, one thing was certain. The confrontation with darkness was not just about winning or losing, but about the transformation it brought. And even though the mystery of the forest was resolved, the struggle for light within me was just beginning. That night, while the stars shone indifferent to our suffering, I realized that the darkness we faced was not just an external phenomenon, but a reflection of the battles we fought within ourselves. What had unfolded in the cave had changed me. I was no longer the same person who had entered there. The echo of the darkness still resonated within me, and even now, amidst the light of day, a persistent shadow seemed to follow me. Austin and I were together, but the connection that had once been so strong now felt tenuous, like a rope stretched to its limit. He looked at me with a mix of concern and compassion, and I could sense that there was something unsaid hanging between us. The words of comfort he tried to offer felt like a balm on a wound that had yet to heal. "Do you remember what the entity said?" I asked, breaking the silence. "It spoke about the fragility of light." He nodded, his eyes filled with an understanding that I too felt. What if the light isn't enough? What if the darkness is just waiting for a moment of weakness to return? Fear settled in my chest, and I realized that this was the truth we could not ignore. The battle had not been just against an external force. It was a struggle against our own weaknesses, insecurities, and fears. With each passing day, the forest seemed to draw closer to me, as if it were alive and aware of my presence. I couldn't help but look at it and wonder, what had truly been defeated? The feeling of being watched intensified, and I wondered if the darkness had really retreated or if it was simply hiding, waiting for the right moment to strike again. One night, I couldn't sleep. Shadows danced around my room, and I couldn't escape what I had learned. I got up and went to the window, where the moonlight filtered through the trees, casting shadows that seemed to writhe. It was at that moment I realized that to face the darkness, I needed to accept that it was a part of me. I could no longer run from it, but had to integrate it into my life. The challenge would be learning to live with this duality. Austin, who had followed me, stood silently by my side. "You're thinking about how to deal with this, aren't you?" he asked, and I knew he understood. "Yes," I replied. "I think the true battle will always be ours. What we do with the shadows within ourselves is what really matters." He looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw a spark of hope, as if perhaps acceptance could lead us to a new understanding. That night, while contemplating the forest under the moonlight, I realized that darkness was not just an enemy to be defeated. It was a part of the cycle of life, a constant reminder that light only exists because there are shadows. I learned that true strength does not lie in eliminating darkness, but in finding a balance, in dancing between light and shadow. By doing so, perhaps we could create a safe space for ourselves, a place where the light could shine more brightly. In the weeks that followed, I began to see the forest in a new light. Instead of a place of terror, it had become a symbol of resilience. Each shadow was a reminder that the struggle would never end, but also that light could always prevail if I was willing to face it. The transformation I experienced was not without pain, but at the same time, it brought a new perspective on what it means to be human. Now, looking towards the horizon, I feel a mix of hope and fear, but mainly a renewed determination. Life is an endless cycle of battles and victories, and as long as there is light, there will also be shadow. And it is this dance between the two that makes us who we are. If you have ever faced your own battles, if you have ever felt the shadow threaten your light, I invite you to reflect on this. How do you deal with your own darkness? Share your experiences in the comments, and let's explore this path of acceptance and transformation together. If the story resonated with you, like and subscribe so we can continue this journey together. Light and shadow are always around us. It's time to embrace them and move forward.